Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today we're going to look at the murder of Officer Debra Corr, Aurora, Colorado Police Department. Officer Debra Corr was 26 years old. Now, she was married to a fella. He was a Denver police officer. Now, she was a police officer there in Aurora, Colorado, which is bumps up to Denver. So I guess that made it kind of convenient for them. Now, she only had about a year on the job. In fact, she had just gotten off probation where she could ride by herself. Now, all the action's going to occur for the most part right here in Denver. Now, this story is going to be a little different from most of the stories I do on The Fallen Badge. This is going to have a twist to it. In fact, a real big twist. The fellow that's going to be responsible for taking the life of Officer Corr, turns out he was a serial killer. So when we get started on this story, it's going to start down in Fort Worth, Texas, where he did his first killing when he was still in high school. In fact, he was a football star there at the high school, Kirkpatrick High School, Fort Worth. And then he fled that jurisdiction. He came up to Denver. And while he's in Denver, he's going to kill 4 women. Now, his preferred method of killing these women was stabbing them. And we're going to see after he killed these 4 women, his last victim, number 5, is going to be Officer Corr. So he's as bad as you can get. It's August 8th, 1969, Fort Worth, Texas. There was a bowling alley used to be there in Fort Worth called the Berry Bowling Alley. Now, on this particular night, our fella here was hanging out at the bowling alley. Now, as I mentioned earlier, he was supposedly a big-time football star at Kirkpatrick High School there in Fort Worth. So I guess he just liked hanging out at the bowling alley. Well, now, he must have gotten to some kind of issue with somebody. A fella named Rodney Bonham. Now, this fella Rodney, he was sitting in a car there at the bowling alley. And I don't know if there was just bad blood between them or what. I read one account said that they'd had some kind of disagreement. Now, so our football star, he pulls out a pistol and he shoots Rodney. Well, the round hits him in the neck. Well, then our no-account suspect, he takes off running. Well, now for 4 days, Rodney was up in the hospital, and he finally died. Now, this fellow was going to junior college there in the Fort Worth area, so he was trying to be something. And evidently, our no-account suspect didn't want to be anything other than what he was, a killer. Well, now, he calls, our suspect, he calls Rodney's father when he finds out that Rodney's dead. He calls the daddy up, and he told him, he said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I'm sorry he's dead, but we all got to go sometime, and I'm sorry I shot him." Now, he didn't stay around too long after that. Our no-account suspect, he went on and he fled to Denver, Colorado. He got up there sometime in 1970 or so, or late 1969. Now, between 1970 and 1977, he was committing rapes and burglaries and assaults and all kinds of mayhem up in the Denver area. Now, he got caught and he did spend a little time in the Colorado State Hospital, and then they released him. I'm sure there's some doctor working at that institute said he'd done cured our boy and that he was good to go. I'd say that doctor made a misstep with our suspect. It's December 7th, 1978, in Denver. It's a lady named Madeline Lavadeus. She was 33 years old. She was a magazine editor. And she was at home with her 2 kids, young kids. Well, it was sometime in the morning. There was a knock at the door. At least that's what they're thinking happened. There's no signs of forced entry. So police are thinking that our suspect knocked on the door. Miss Lavadeus came, answered the door, and he bum rushed her. Now, he took her upstairs to the bedroom. He raped her, then he stabbed her to death. Then he left. Now, her body wasn't found till about 6 p.m. that night. Her husband came home and he knew something was wrong as soon as he come in the front door, because the 9-month-old daughter was in a swing on the back porch alone, and the 3-year-old was watching TV in the dark. Now, the husband, he goes upstairs and he finds his wife. She's been stabbed multiple times. Now, the only thing that's saving grace was our fella. He was a sick, no-account fella, but at least he didn't hurt them little kids. Now, the police looked into the case, but it didn't get very far, and of course, you have to remember, 1978, there's no DNA. So they collect evidence. That's all they do, and they stored it, thank goodness. So later on, we're going to find out collecting and storing evidence and saving it's going to come in handy down the road. It's August 10th, 1980. Dolores Brejas. She's walking to work. She's in the 500 block of East 17th Avenue, right there at the intersection with Pearl. And our no-account suspect confronts her and stabs her to death. Now, I don't know how long he'd been following her, or if he just happened to see her and decided she was the next one or not. But she's found laying out in the road there in the intersection. Police come, they collect evidence. There's no tie-in between her homicide and the one of Miss Lavadeus, because one's inside a house and one's out on the street, so they don't even associate the two. Now, the sad thing is, Miss Brejas, she had just come in to visit family. She lived down in Texas. And this is going to be her last day at her job there in Denver, and she was going to head back to Texas. It's a dang shame. Sure didn't deserve it. It's December 24th, 1980. The body of Gwendolyn Harris, 27, was found laying out in the middle of the street at East 47th Avenue and Andrews Drive. Now, she had been stabbed multiple times. She still had money on her, so robbery was eliminated as a motive by the police. Now, they were able to track her movements prior to that. She had last been seen at the Polo Club Lounge the night before. 4 days before her body was found. That'd been the last time anyone had seen her. Now, that Polo Club Lounge, I believe that was inside one of the hotels downtown. Now, again, on the scene, police collected their evidence and they stored it away, and police didn't see any kind of connection between Miss Harris's murder and the murder of Miss Brejas or Miss Lavadeus. Because again, you got one attacked inside a home, one attacked on the street, and near as the police could figure, Miss Harris had not been attacked on the street. They didn't think. Thought she might have been in a car. But in any event, they didn't tie any of these murders together. January 24th, 1981. Antoinette Parks. She's 17 years old. Her body is found in a field next to 64th Avenue and Broadway. Now, that was not in incorporated Denver at the time. That was in Adams County. So the sheriff's department handled it. She'd been stabbed multiple times. Now, I got two stories as to what was going on. One, she was walking to school when she got snatched up, and the other one was she is cutting school and was over to boyfriend's, and they got into an argument, and she had stormed out of his house and got snatched up. Either way, the end result is she's brutally murdered. And that case went cold as well. They collected the evidence, they stored it away. That was the end of the story, and these 4 homicides were not in any way connected to the other. It's June 27th, 1981. Now it's about 1 a.m. Officer Corr, she stops a motorist. She thinks he's DUI. Now she stops him on Moline Street, just about a half a block south of Colfax, right in front of I believe was an apartment building at the time. Now she does everything right. This is, like I say, she's just been out on her own for a little while, but she gives her location. She evidently went up and got the guy's driver's license, because it was later recovered in her squad car, but she ran the man's name and she gave the tag number on the vehicle. Now, after a couple minutes, she called for a cage car. Now, some of you may not be familiar with it, but a lot of agencies in the 80s and before then, not every squad car had a cage in it. Some had a cage and some didn't. If you had a cage car, you were a transport car. Everybody else, no cage. I was in Washington, D.C. in the 80s, and you didn't have a cage in your car. If you needed a cage, you had to call for one or call for a paddy wagon. Well, anyway, she gets on the radio and makes that request. Now, at some point after making that request, she evidently got at least one handcuff on our suspect. And then he got the fighting back, because now he's a fairly stout fella. So they get the fighting. Well, there's a police explorer, 19-year-old fella. His last name was Spies. Now, I don't know if he had it on his radio listening to it or what, but he just got through riding the shift, so he was heading home. Well, he stopped to try to help her. So our suspect was able to get Officer Corr's gun. And they're out in the middle of the street, and he shoots her 3 times in the head. Now, Spies, well, he turns and tries to take back off, because now he's seen that he's in a gunfight and he's unarmed. So he tries to take cover behind Officer Corr's squad car. Suspect shoots him in the back. He goes down. Well, now the transport car shows up not too long after that. Now they call for an ambulance. They transport Officer Corr to the hospital, and she dies a few hours later. And that police explorer, Spies, he recovers, but not too well. The bullet did a lot of damage around his spine, so he's in bad shape even to this day. Now, of course, they got his tag number and his name and his driver's license, so the police, they go to his apartment. Well, it's a 3rd floor apartment, because he dives out the window. And anybody else, it would kill you or break a leg, but it doesn't hurt him. But they're able to arrest him, and they take him to jail, because now they're going to charge him with murdering an Aurora police officer. Now, just a few days after he shot and killed Officer Corr, our suspect did the only intelligent thing he probably did his whole life, and he hung himself in his jail cell. Now, he did leave a suicide note. The suicide note said, "To the Denver community, I pray that I be forgiven for taking up your time and for my sickening behavior. To the kid in the hospital and Miss Corr, I didn't mean what I did. I was so uptight. Forgive me. Signed, and then suspects' names on it. Now, the story doesn't end there. Denver police, the cold case file, they started pulling old cases and doing DNA work, which is what departments are doing all over the country. And 4 of the cases they looked at was Miss Lavadeus, Miss Barojas, Miss Harris, and Miss Parks. And in 2013, they got a hit to Miss Barojas and Miss Lavadeus. Then in 2015, they were able to connect Miss Harris's death to the same killer. And then in 2018, Miss Parks. Now, it took them a little bit of time. It took them another year to figure out, okay, we've got the DNA match on all 4, but we don't know who the fella is. Well, they get around, they do that genealogy DNA stuff. And through that, they're able to narrow it down to relatives in Texas. And then from there, they exhumed the body of our suspect, and they're able to get a conclusive match that showed he was the killer of the 4 women and of Officer Corr. Officer Debra Sue Corr. End of watch, June 27th, 1981.